Thank you for joining Change Your Mind Transformational Dialogue Radio. Your host, Dr. Craig Weiner, brings you cutting-edge experts and paradigm shifters in fields as diverse as body-mind healing, neuroscience, and consciousness explorations. Join us on this voyage to explore new worlds in science and transformational pathways. Seek out new understanding and boldly go where few have gone before.
Welcome, everybody. This is Dr. Craig Weiner at Change Your Mind Transformational Dialogue Radio. And I know you're getting so tired of hearing this. Every time I come on, I say I've got this new great guest, and I always do. So I hope that you trust me that each time I say it, it really is true, because it is. So today it's a pleasure and a joy, and I'm already laughing because I've been talking with our guests already before the show started, and it is the infamous Candace Pert. Now, for those of you, yes, you can tell she's on the line. Shh, be quiet. This is the introduction part. Dr. Candace Pert, here's some of her biography just to overwhelm you and inspire you. She's an international recognized pharmacologist. She has published, believe it or not, over 250 scientific articles. She got her PhD in pharmacology at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. She served as chief of the section of Brain Biochemistry at the Clinical Neuroscience Branch at the NIH. That's the National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH. She held a research professorship at the Department of Physiology and Biophysics at Georgetown. She's currently working in a private company developing an AIDS vaccine, and we'll be talking about that, as well as treatments for other conditions. Now, what you probably know Candace best for is she was a great guest in the film What the Bleep Do We Know? She was on the Bill Moyer's TV program Healing in the Mind. And my first contact with knowing about her work was in just a groundbreaking work called Molecules of Emotion, the scientific basis behind mind-body medicine. And that came out by Scribner in 1997. If you want to find out more, read more, follow her, you can go to CandacePert.com. That's CandacePert.com. And now, without any further ado, I get to introduce just a delightful woman being scientist, researcher extraordinaire, Candace Pert. Welcome on the show, Candace.
Thank you, Craig. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy you're on the show. This is just fun and wonderful, and I'm sure our audience will get to know exactly what I mean by that. So I have not sent you any prepared questions. We're just going to go with the flow here. I first just want to thank you for bridging the gap between being an amazing, groundbreaking scientist and also somebody that's willing to speak their mind and speak their heart and find those two, a way to work together. Have you always been like that combination of those polarities?
Yes, I always talk too much my whole life. But no, it's been an evolution because, and it's kind of going all the way around and coming back, because as a scientist, you're trained to weigh every word and speak nothing but the truth in the way it can be backed up by previous research, et cetera, et cetera. And that can be stultifying when you're trying to communicate with people. But my career kind of took a turn because after discovering, the receptors for endorphins, and then the endorphins came out, and it was all such a big, huge thing, and I got to speak to so many people from all walks of scientific life, everything from endocrinologists to, surgeons, and then it started going towards speaking to the people who really know a lot about health, the chiropractors.
Oh, thanks.
Well, I gradually got converted by exposure and observation. A good scientist has observation, and then they research, and then they do experiments. A lot of experiments I've done on myself. And I started to become a real fan of so-called alternative medicine. I'm not sure chiropractic is in that, but I've kind of renamed that whole thing. I don't like that term alternative, which sounds like us versus them.
Right. What do you use?
Well, then it evolved to integrative,
right,
which everybody kind of liked, but I don't even like that because that sounds like there's two bodies of knowledge that get integrated, and that's not true. And what it really is, it's lamestream is basically, I got that from Sarah Palin. Lamestream medicine is actually old paradigm, and what I call it new paradigm physiology and new paradigm medicine. And in new paradigm physiology and new paradigm medicine, we appreciate that it's beyond the mind matters. The mind is primal. And the mind, this is a neuroscientist talking, the mind is not necessarily in the brain. In fact, it's quite beyond the brain.
Okay, that right there is a delicious topic that we could spend an hour on. But for those people that are going, well, wait a minute, okay, the mind is the brain. Isn't that a synonym, or aren't they the same thing? And certainly I don't think you and I think it is, but maybe you could clarify your thoughts on that.
Right. Well, I started out as a neuroscientist, feeling very much that all the secrets of understanding people, because I am a peopleologist above all, very interested in people, would be found if I could cut the brain into smaller and smaller pieces and understand what chemical every neuron was squirting out. And you can do that, but then find that, my research basically led me to the fact that some of the most interesting, important chemicals that are dramatically mood altering in a second, and this can be drugs, psychoactive drugs, or it can be natural substances that are placed into the brain. I mean, things that do dramatic things. These chemicals are not just in your brain, but they're in your immune system. This is something we figured out in the early 80s, and that was kind of the birth of what some people call PsychoNeuroImmunology. You were using that term before.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you actually, I don't know if you coined the term, but certainly you brought it to the forefront where most people could actually say, know, and pronounce that. So.
Yeah, I think we may have brought it respectability. The history of the term, which I'm into, like accurate history.
Good, thank you.
That's because I'm a girl, so I don't want to claim too much credit. The boys like to act like they invented everything themselves. That's a sidebar.
Yes, it is, which we'll get to, but go ahead and continue.
But in Molecules of Emotion, the early years, the first person who used the word was, he used the word psychoimmunology. That was the late, great George Solomon, who was a professor, a psychiatrist at UCLA. He had to be in Southern California to have that way of thinking. And then, and he was really very interested in the role of the mind in disease and could see the connections. And then there was a book that was actually called PsychoNeuroImmunology, and I'm blocking for a moment on the author of that book. But early in my courtship with Michael Ruff, who is my close colleague, business partner, among other things, husband for 27 years at this point, amazing. During our early courtship, he actually lent me that book, PsychoNeuroImmunology. It was in the trunk of his car. I said, this looks interesting. And it had a number of vignettes. The book came out in about 1980, 81. It was all about the many, reasons why you would have to think that the mind played a role in disease. But it didn't have the scientific hardware in there. And that's kind of what Mike and I started working on and published lots of papers showing that what I came to call the molecules of emotion, starting with the endorphin and others, were not just found in the brain, but were found in the immune system and were found in the gut and were found making a network, and that it was much more of a network, a psychosomatic network, we called it in our writing, and psychosomatic network. But PNI, psychoneuroimmunology, kind of became the term. We actually coined the term psychoimmunoendocrine network in a paper we published in Science together in 1984, which was, he basically said if I could get him a paper in Science, he would marry me. No, it wasn't quite like that. There were some other factors. But that paper, which is really about the origin of small cell lung cancer, is a very important paper because in the discussion section, we actually touch on the fact, and it was a core aspect of the book, that the migration of cells, the cells are always moving. The cells in your bloodstream that we call monocytes or white blood cells actually have their origin in the bone marrow and move out and become the cells of your body. And lung cancer doesn't really, at least small cell, doesn't come from the lung. It comes from these, what people now call, the seminal cells, the stem cells, which are, the lung is constantly being formed. Our bodies are constantly being formed. And the formation of our bodies is under the direction of these chemicals, which are the molecules of emotion, because they're found in the classical part of the brain that mediates emotion, like the amygdala and the hypothalamus, but they're also found in other parts of the brain. And when you start to look at the way things are wired up, you realize that emotion permeates everything. I don't think there can even be logic without emotion. We can't even retrieve memories without emotion. Emotions, they run everything you do, remember, perceive, and this is just based upon the physiology, the anatomy. And the term we wanted to call it psychoimmunoendocrine network to capture the three branches that had a lot of these peptides in them. Peptides are the key. But as the years roll by, I'm glad that term lost to psychoneuroimmunology, because the right word would be psychoneuroimmunoendocrine, lipo, genito. I mean, it's like every system in your body is so closely interconnected, and then it leads naturally into this very interesting area of energy medicine and new paradigm medicine. And everyone knows about molecules of emotion
now.
My first book, because it became a Bible
right
for people who are practitioners. They've been doing great work for years. They didn't need to know all this stuff. They already knew this stuff. We basically came to a theory based upon our scientific observations. I'm using a regal we, I guess it's the people in the lab and Mike and I talking and thinking together. But in fact, the brain, it operates as one kind of coherent, vibrating, energetic system. There's no systems hooked up. Systems are a fabrication. Systems are
Well, it would be like the lines drawn on a map. One state doesn't end at this line, but we put a line there to distinguish one side from the other. And I would say systems are like that in the body physiologically as well, eh?
I think that's a very good analogy. Were you ever from Canada?
No, but I'm close in Washington, so I pick it up.
You're picking up some of their local lingo. I think that's a great analogy. And it is like states, because the state borders were drawn by politics. And that's how the borders in different practices of, scientific departments and branches of medicine, they always have a history and a political history, and has nothing to do with the reality of how the body is organized. So that's a great analogy.
I really need to offer, even though you'll probably not take it, so much gratitude for what we so take for granted now in the field of mind-body medicine. In fact, when I speak with patients every day, and I'm speaking about the roles of stress and trauma and emotions with their physiology, et cetera, it's such an accepted paradigm now but it really wasn't that long ago that the idea of what we think, believe, feel affects the real hardcore objective anatomy. That was very, that Cartesian model wasn't that long ago that it started to break apart, and molecules of emotion really was very seminal in that discussion and that acceptance. So
thank you. I think that's true. On the East Coast, a lot of it hasn't even broken. You have a very warped view of the world from where you are.
Thank you. I do.
It's an interesting gradient, but yeah, I mean, it's been. It's interesting. At the time Molecules of Emotion came out, there were no textbooks even used the word for. You could look in the index, and there were all these physiological psychology textbooks. They wouldn't even use the word emotion. There was people you had to just observe, in the scientific realm.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a few years later that people started to talk about your emotional IQ and talk about the importance of emotions. And they provide a great integrating theory for the hard science and the woo-woo observations. And woo-woo is just another word for mysterious.
Right.
Things that we don't really deeply understand them, except to say that their explanations lie in another realm. My second book that people are less familiar with, which has the misleading title, some of the Amazon people, the critics, they lambast the title. The title's sort of a bit of a gag, but not a gag. And it's been translated into a lot of languages, but it's called Everything You Need to Know to Feel Good. But there's parentheses around the second O. So it's to feel good or to feel God. But it's really like sort of 10 months in my life. But it talks about where I was when I wrote it, which was somewhere around 2005 or 6. It's a Hay House book, not a Scribner book. Hay House, the publisher of Louise Hay, as opposed to Scribner, publisher of Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald.
They had a very different feel, both books. The second one was very personal. Yes.
Yeah, it was personal, and I'm starting to vibrate into energy medicine and trying to, kind of explain my where I was at that moment. So
thank you for that willingness to reveal that, because most scientists won't go to a place where they have the ability to, they'll stay very much behind the walls of academia. But there's, I don't want to say there's this trend, but it's really a beautiful revelation. I just had the opportunity to interview Dean Radin. Gabor Mate will be broadcasting him in a few days. And there's this, I think there's this necessity, no, that's the wrong word. There's this movement toward a willingness to reveal not just the perfect, not just the academic, that both coexist and they can complement each other. Have you found that? What has been when you present, and you've written books both of a personal nature and a very more academic nature, and then you present at neuroscience conferences, but also maybe at Hay House type events, and what are the audiences like that are different? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, well, this is interesting. This is really deep because I've given a lot of talks. I think basically the second book is about being a professional keynote speaker. And just remember that I'm really a hardcore scientist. And when I started all this other stuff, it was almost like recreation. It was my outlet. It was my artistic expression. It was like, playing in a band at night. And my day job at the NIH was very different. So a true academic talk has absolutely nothing to do with the other one. And you're in certain confines, as I said, and you're trying to prove something. And, I continued to give academic talks at Rockefeller University, et cetera, on our AIDS research at the time. But, at the end of the day, everybody's sitting there as a human being, and they all have the same kind of, rules of behavior and brains. And I don't know, I've found humor to be an amazingly important way to communicate with people. And I'm fascinated by what it is that makes people laugh. And I seem to have a gift, a compulsion to make people laugh, even in big lectures.
So you were talking about the importance of humor, your proclivity and your skillfulness with bringing humor to professional audiences and collegiate audiences. Academic.
Yeah, well, and even in academic, I mean, humor is so interesting because to me it's some kind of energetic transfer of information through the different segments of the spinal cord or through different chakras. And, it kind of is spreading this integration because I think health is really all about integration. The more things are talking to each other and communicating with each other, whether we're talking about parts of your body or what's come up for me in the last few days, people in an organization. If they're not communicating, it doesn't work.
Well, you brought up an interesting idea as a breakthrough in understanding on a chemical level, predominantly being the transfer of information from the Molecules of Emotion book. But it seems as if we're moving into an era now where, however we want to describe this form of energy medicine and all its different realities or all its different incarnations, what do you think might cause the next large breakthrough on an acceptance level, more academically, as far as how are we going to discover or perhaps have insight into the systems that we can't see as well? What do you see is going to cause the next level of breakthrough that we either may discover or really come to understand on a more scientific level?
Interesting question. Well, first let me put my little Mary Sunshine hat, hat aside and put on my critical mean. It's not going to come from academia. And, the pharmaceutical industry is in some ways an extension of academia because it's so stuck in old paradigm thinking. They don't even know to ask these questions. I'm particularly unhappy about this idea have you heard about this brain project that's
Sure, of course.
Well, I'm going to be a person who would feel very negative toward it. I think there's no way I think there's a snowball's chance in hell, to coin an old phrase, that's going to lead to any kind of breakthrough.
Why?
Well, because it's not, there's networks that fire together, but so what? I mean, to continue to just break it down into smaller and smaller pieces and see what cells fire with what cells. There's a tremendous amount of hype there, and it's not going to be what happens. I mean, basically what's happened is we have some major diseases of our time that mainstream academia has not addressed properly. And let's talk about Alzheimer's disease. These are diseases that they're all in the category of increasing with denial that they're really increasing. So Alzheimer's disease is, the story is, we're going to have more and more and more because people are getting older. And then there's been so much play on the genetics of the thing. But actually, there's been a couple of tribes of people they follow genetically who happen to, they definitely have a genetic aspect of Alzheimer's, and they have certain fibrils, and basically everything's gone off the deep end. The fact is, academic research and pharmaceutical research over the last 20 years have spent, I think it's almost up to $1 trillion, and has come up with nothing. We really don't have any cures or even effective treatments. Yes, there's a few drugs on the market. That's another story. You can get drugs on the market without them necessarily being highly effective. And I'm speaking as the chief scientific officer of a company that hopes to be able to get drugs on the market, because if you don't get drugs on the market, then you can't get them out to the people who need them. Mm-hmm. But this whole idea that everything is genetic, there's been this romance with molecular biology, which is a buzzword for genetics, and it hasn't really, it hasn't panned out. So they're at the NIH. The people at the NIH, they're very smart. The NIH is 10 minutes from my house. As you mentioned, I was a section chief there for many years. My section was called Section on Brain Biochemistry. And all of these, so it's going on there, this, right now they're under the gun. The economy shifted. In the old days before the economy collapsed, NIH scientists had the privilege of just working on what interested them, and there were all kinds of great discoveries being made. Suddenly there was this thing called, the buzzword is translational research. And translational research means, that you're supposed to discover something that's going to help people's health. And just because you want it, it doesn't really happen. And I think that this brain program they're mentioning 10 million or something, which is a pittance, but the secret plans is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars every year. It's just a bunch of, in my mind, hype to raise more expectations of what mainstream scientists can do. But if it's in the wrong paradigm, it's kind of like, go back to, Copernicus, pre-Copernicus, and wait, who was the one that was, it's in my book, I can't remember. Who was the one that got executed by the Catholic Church for realizing the Earth revolved around the sun? And
you know what, I have a thought, but I don't want to say it. It certainly wasn't Galileo, but I think it was Copernicus.
It was.
Wasn't it?
Galileo was the one. I'm not sure he was, maybe he died in prison, but he was the one who figured it out.
I think you're right.
Galileo figured it out. And there was a period. This is what's so interesting. There was a whole period when the geniuses of the church, like the geniuses of the NIH, the geniuses of the church were mapping more and more finely the orbits of the stars. As they went around in little circles and had more and more, higher technology, more observations, better. I don't know if they were looking through telescopes or what, and they were making more and more intricate little diagrams to justify and bolster their wrong theory that the sun revolved around the earth, and you could interpret everything that way. And it's just the same thing. Okay, so now we're going to get we're going to map smaller, and we're going to record from smaller and smaller pieces of the brain. This new brain science thing, it's all about technology and microchips, and it actually, there's very little in there about neurochemistry, which I think is really important because that's how you invent drugs, receptors for neurochemicals, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that.
So I'm going to bring you back around then for a minute, just so I don't want to make sure not lose it. No, it's fine. It's all good. So if we have billions of dollars moving towards deeper and deeper into the same paradigm, and we don't have, the pennies of funding that go towards, let's just talk about this new paradigm science, and yet we're still getting some amazing results when we look at smaller entities like HeartMath, for example, or smaller organizations that are taking minimal funds and still exploring ways that may actually show things to be working in a different direction. What else do you think is necessary? We obviously need objective science to validate, to get more funds, but what else do you think needs to happen to generate the new paradigm science and healing to grow?
Interesting. Very good question. It's already happening. It's not billions. The government doesn't have billions. It's millions. NIH cut back. I think HeartMath is a great example of people in the leading edge of changing the paradigm. And, I think it's going to come, gosh, listen to me now. It's going to come from the private sector. Because, HeartMath is basically private because there's less group think, and there can be lots of small innovators, and things that work are going to happen. Things like neurobiofeedback, the improvements in that. I think the private and better drugs that really are non-toxic and working, that are designed out of the new paradigm, which is what I like to think our drugs are coming from. And we do have a treatment for for Alzheimer's disease. It's nowhere near testing in people yet, but it's moving along in preclinical development. So, yeah, the future is, I was going to say the biggest thing that has to happen is time. It's already happening. Nobody needs to do anything. I mean, what happened, and time is getting quicker and quicker. In the old days, it took, 200 years for a paradigm shift to happen,
Right.
Then, Lister washing his hands. He went from being a pariah to winning prizes. It took him a period of 30 years. Now, I think things are just speeding up more and more. And,
Right.
I mean, what's driving it is going to be economics. I mean, we know that mainstream doesn't work. That's the real problem with it. The reason it's so expensive is so much of the treatments don't really work. And when people come in with amazing treatments that can be proven to work, then low-tech, inexpensive treatments that use the power of the mind, then there's going to be radical change. I'm excited about my, not that it's the greatest CD in the world necessarily, but it's
yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the phone yesterday with an amazing woman who's head of a group of a number of hospitals that she advises that they have the name Spirit in their title. And we were talking about the possibility of designing a simple clinical trial using a CD. I have 2 CDs. One is called Psychosomatic Wellness, and the other one is called Healing the Hurting, Shining the Light. And the Healing the Hurting, Shining the Light is available on my website only, which is strangely enough called CandacePert.com. Spelled with an ice, not with an ice, but an ace, but spell it anyway, it'll come up, I think. But, they're both set to music. They both use certain kinds of music progression that I think really seems to resonate and pull the vibrating parts of your molecules and your tissues together. But they both deal with lying and being in a relaxed, semi-hypnotic state and having an imaginary vision or hearing a musical lecture and basically letting your body heal itself. I mean, if we get out of the way, our minds have the power to make us sick, and our minds have the power to heal us. And that's like the lowest tech intervention of all. So we're going to I'm planning a study. I'm not sure who I'll get to do it with first. Something really simple with a simple endpoint. People who have a disease and who just go in there and get, some groups, it'd be a very well-designed study, and get the CD or don't get the CD, have appropriate controls, and look at a simple endpoint like how many days in the hospital or how many days, before the cancer comes back, if it comes back, and stuff like that.
Well, I think that what you're speaking about is perfect, because what I see in the field of healing that's really emerging are things that on one hand sound very simple, but as we start to appreciate the neurobiology that's happening from sound, from different frequencies, from light, from color, from exposure. I mean, look at the focus, the meditation studies, the mindfulness studies that are just growing. Thousands and thousands are saying, be still, breathe. I teach a right brain class. We started off with a meditation that just says, look, there's physiological effects for when we take a deep breath, for when we sip water. The parasympathetic nervous system gets stimulated when we start to look at things like feeling gratitude and blessing and self-appreciation. All these things that on one hand have been very subjective and obvious, there's starting to finally be some objective scientific research that says, oh, that really does make a difference, and this, your CD is a perfect example. I look forward to hearing it.
Those are great examples. Basically what, and I always said this when I was on the circuit, that I'm glad you like my research, but you already knew all this. I mean, I'm glad that I give you confidence to keep doing exactly what you're doing. It's just, these are the this is just scientific evidence. I guess it's scientific evidence for, clinical practices that are already being efficacious. And I don't want to totally diss the NIH and all. That's ridiculous. I mean, I just heard, I actually gave a talk recently in New Orleans this was amazing. This was a satellite session on pain that was sponsored by a small group from the NIH, which is called the Division of Complementary and Complementary and Alternative Medicine.
It was the one Wayne Jonas and
Wayne was the very first person he founded it, and I wrote about it in Molecules of Motion. I had a chapter of it, and now it's evolved to the point that they're getting a little more funding, and they had a number of speakers showing brain scans after various kinds of pain interventions. But the person in my mind who stole the show, and I have to think of her name, Kathy, her last name, she's actually the intramural director right in Bethesda here at the NIH. What she showed, it was totally amazing, various parts of the brain in the cortex, which is the part where we hold our stories and our beliefs that have such a big effect on how we perceive the world. The cortex will thicken or thin out in the parts that project downward. So a person who's in chronic pain all the time, like fibromyalgia, nobody could ever find anything. Well, they've got very thin cortex over the parts of the pain projection that are modulating it from the cortex. You get a bunch of acupuncture, that part thickens just like it does in meditation. So it's almost like it's a module you put into your brain through these practices. And there's the proof coming out, and using very sophisticated brain scans that have they'll never be used clinically or in the field, God forbid, because that would be expensive, but they basically validate just what you were saying, particularly in the field of pain, how powerful the mind is in controlling things. And yes, the mind is affecting the brain, and the brain is releasing the chemicals, and sometimes you can help it along with the right chemicals that are mimetics of the brain's own secretions.
Right. So, when we look at the direct applications of neuroplasticity and the plastic, the ability for the brain and perhaps mind to both thicken and thin, to expand and create new neural connections, or to break apart synaptic connections, all of those things with interventions and are possible. And what I love what you're saying is whether they're chemicals that are induced by the external environment, by our thoughts, by what we're feeling, by our emotions, or whether they're pharmaceutical, they're really not that much different. They're achieving the same result.
Yes, saying that up to a point, although I'm a critic of toxic pharmaceutical drugs.
Correct.
And elderly people being loaded with 18 kinds of drugs to prevent this and that when they're 82, which basically...
Well, we're both in complete agreement with that.
Right. But we don't want to... But here's something. This is why the mind is not in the brain in one sentence. And the irony of this is I figured this out, or I came to understand it and appreciate it, not in any kind of, complementary and alternative research grant or looking in the literature, but in trying to understand the mechanism of action of a peptide drug that our company is making, which is going to be go into trials to treat neuropathic pain. Neuropathic pain is this horrific pain that, it comes to people who have from cancer damage, from injuries. It's the kind of pain where people become addicted to opiates and become incapacitated, and and all we can do is give them various doses of opiates by different routes and play with it in different ways. I mean, it's huge, the number of people who suffer from chronic pain. It's unbelievable. And we're just assuming everything's happening up in the brain. Well, here's what is true, and it comes from rat studies, and there are human studies. But cells that are in your brain, many of them that actually shape synapses and decide where connections are being made or broken, they start in your bone marrow. I'm not talking about when you're a baby. I'm talking about, like, since you and I started talking, we've probably each made at least 1 million new brain cells. I'm tired. You've probably made 3 million. Maybe I've made 1 million. And these are coming out of our bone marrow and moving into the brain. And it's a normal process, and they're eventually culminating in new neurons. And right now they're being called, various, the immunologists have so much jargon, I still don't understand what they're talking about even after 30 years of going to their conferences. But these various subgroups of T cells and natural killer cells and monocytes have a bunch of different subtypes. They're literally moving up into the brain and modulating development and becoming brain cells. So that's why you have to have the sound mind and the sound body. That's why the brain is not, your body doesn't exist to carry your head around. And that's why you need to, at least take a walk once in a while. But if not that, try to get treated and try to consider your body as being an essential part of your brain. And the body.
That was fascinating. And it's funny, what came to mind was when I hear people have a sense of something so strongly, and they say it's like I know it in my bones.
Yes, that's interesting. And you know what? And then someone told me at a talk I gave about 100 talks ago that in Chinese medicine they consider the bones the source of everything in the body.
Mm-hmm. The marrow is a very important part. Of
what kind of modalities? What is your school of chiropractic? Or do you still practice? Or are you
Sure. No, I'm actively in process. So, after 20-something years, I went to Life Chiropractic West, and my foundation as a chiropractor has always been a very hands-on, manual chiropractor. I was a massage therapist for years. I moved into chiropractic, and then it went from being a very physical modality to then starting to appreciate the more subtler energetic components, and then especially the mind-body connection. So now I combine EFT with chiropractic, with whatever it takes to help empower a person to be able to take responsibility for what's happening in their mind and body. And as you said from the very beginning, everything is totally interconnected. So what's happening in their body affects their relationship.
Right.
Their relationship affects how they feel, which affects their body. So that practice of finding what is going to best serve any patient, I think as a physician and educator and teacher, is really our primary responsibility, I feel, is how do we educate, inspire, and provide enough information and input to have somebody make that change for themselves and to be empowered to do that. That to me is that journey and that inquiry and that wonderful sweet spot.
Wow. To do EFT and chiropractic, I haven't heard of that emotional freedom technique for people who know one of these forms of energy psychology, one of the oldest and most developed that are being used, that are low tech. They're unbelievable. They're somehow tapping into old acupuncture points, as I understand it, and they're, with just a few. I mean, it's amazing. How do you use it? Are you working on someone and then you give them a little thing that you?
It's a great question, and if I were being interviewed, I could go on and on. No, I will. No, I'm fine. I will answer that. It's actually fun to go both ways, but because so many of our listeners actually are in the EFT world, I will take that moment. So for me, somebody comes in, and I'm always listening, as I think any person in the healing arts should, for why is the person coming first. Then if I sense, there's really more than just a physical injury here, that there's some component that if that stress were relieved, especially if it's a negative emotional stress and there's a lot of anger and stress and all those different negative emotional components that can contribute to their pain, all we have to have is a little mind-body discussion first based on molecules of emotion, and people really do understand that their physical well-being is strongly influenced, if not caused by, that's a leap for some, by their psycho-emotional states. Then if we can influence and cause a reduction in stress, and especially if they can be empowered to do that in a short period of time, they start to see themselves as healers of themselves, and that's incredibly empowering, which has all kinds of effects. So, for me, using the EFT is one of many effective modalities, and knowing that you're supportive of that just is absolutely wonderful, because these are the kinds of breakthrough technologies that we're starting to see have incredibly quick results. We're seeing studies for PTSD with 86 and 87% result improvements in as short as a few sessions, where just as well as chronic pain, as well as so many other things, so phobias and anxiety and a variety of things that stress results in. So because it's a neurochemical basis for how we're working. We're still understanding how it's all working, yes, and that's why we need researchers like you backing us up, so that when I speak about this to a group of medical doctors or at a conference, then I can have something to back up so that they're listening can perk up and be open, and it just doesn't sound too good to be true.
Yeah, well, listen, I think what we need is not researchers like me. What we need, I'm from Washington, D.C. We need lobbyists in Washington. There's more than enough data on these low-tech, exciting techniques and how they could be used to reduce health costs. And what we need is ways to implement them into, looking at prevention. We're starting to hear more talk about prevention, and well-designed studies in which the end point is dollars spent. This at the end of the day, this is what will drive the revolution. I agree with you. It's amazing what these techniques will do. I won't go into it, but I got rid of a lot of my childhood traumas in one weekend. Some incredible therapist using a combination of neurobiofeedback and EFT.
I think you wrote about that in your second book, didn't you?
I wrote that stuff was good, but this was even beyond that. It's amazing. You see, I was brought to the planet because I need so much healing that I get to explore all these modalities. And if I can heal myself, I can heal anything. And I'm a work in progress, I think.
Thank you, as we all are. I promised one colleague that I would ask about this, because we just gently touched on the topic of gender earlier. And one of the things that I love about you is really the glass ceiling, what you wrote about in having to work through as a woman in the field of academia. And how has that, now that you have been in there for more than several years, have you found that to change? Have you found hopefulness and improvement in an equality of gender-based in science and academia?
Well, I'm looking beyond science and academia. No, things.
Great, thanks a lot.
No, it's amazing. Books like Lean In, and for a while the word feminism was a dirty word. It's maybe starting to come back. This nouveau feminism, but there's this interesting biological thing between men and women. Men are men and women are women, and God bless them both, and they're different. And it comes out even in the highest centers of the boardrooms. My chairman and CEO is an amazing, brilliant woman with 3 degrees from Harvard, and yet there's just a tendency, and she's bold and beautiful, and she'll wear her beauty and use her beauty and be part of it, and yet there's this, these are subconscious programs where the men will, even the men allied with her will think, will slightly act. The word is sexist, the old-fashioned word, not taking it seriously. No, I don't think things have, we have got some great strides in the government and the Supreme Court and et cetera, but the NIH, it used to have only 2 women heads of institutes. Now maybe there's 3 or something. That one's moving a little more slowly because, the NIH is the bastion of, it's kind of like looking at the bishops of the Catholic churches and equivalent of 1500. But I wanted to say at the end of, I think we're getting close to the
Yes, I actually was just going to say what you'd like to cover before we finish, because we are
Thank you.
moving
You're
towards.
so kind. I wanted to say that I'm excited about my new self-published book. I'm excited about a new book that is called The Science of Golf and Life.
Okay, that is just, you're going to have to explain that one. We're
provocative-
from molecules of motion to feeling good and got to golf. So
well, you know,
make the
I'm
transition.
getting, as I progress in my wisdom here, people are always asking me they think I have the answer to every question beyond health. And as you were saying before, it's all about taking responsibility for yourself. And golf is an interesting game because there's nobody to blame. There's just a ball and there's you. It's not a contact sport. It's not a team sport. And it's just what you do to that ball. And golf becomes a metaphor for what you can do in your life when you start to use the principles, such as, hey, when you're playing hole 4, stop thinking about how you screwed up on hole 3 and stop planning the hole 5 that you're worried about, because you know there's a sand trap in there that you screwed up the last 10 times you played the course. So I'm writing it with Debbie Cruz, who's a golf coaching expert, and she's also really a fascinating healer who uses horses in work with autistic children, has worked with dolphins. And so it's like a merger. I mean, nothing is more, quote, mechanistic than golf, and yet you'll find the leaders in golf coaching mock the Newtonian approach, and they think more about emotions and energetics and mystery and, the realm of how you get your best performance. So I'm hoping to just, I'm excited because it's going to be right on my website and nowhere else. I don't have to do agents and publishers and run around New York and have book signings. And, the publishing industry is, as we knew it, is almost, it's declining. And I'm excited about putting it on CandacePert.com. I mean, when this airs, it'll be there. And, that'll be fun. I mean, the idea that you can just write a book with some people and it gets right out there, and the people who worked on it and helped just, get to have it and get the profits from it. And there's not a bunch of things and people intervening is exciting to me.
Yeah, you were talking about paradigms changing quickly, and here's one way in which creating new technologies and new collaborations take something from an idea and vision and move into its manifestation in a relatively short period of time. So thank you for taking that, because there's millions of golfers, and if they're listening through golf can help them to shift their paradigm towards the way things are, then, when we have a lot of corporate CEOs and pharmaceutical guys and women that play a lot of golf, so maybe that's the way that you're going to get your message.
Hippies like me don't play golf. But maybe I'm going to take it up now. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing.
Well, you're probably going to have to be offered to speak at some golfing conventions, so you might want to give it a try.
Debbie's convention, The Science of Golf, was the name of her convention, and I was a keynote speaker at. And that's where I met her and got to see all that. But the idea of listen, everybody's a human being, and everybody wants to feel good, and everybody wants to, enjoy their life. And, hey, newsflash, money does not buy happiness. Newsflash, it's about the love and connections and the good feeling in your heart that you know all about. And, and let's get some of that out to everybody. And I think that, there's a lot of healing going on the planet, and everybody can share in this. And you'd be surprised. A lot of CEOs are very hip. You don't get to be a CEO unless you understand and appreciate the what other people are feeling and thinking. And CEOs. There's some of them are schmoes, but some of everything is schmoes.
Exactly.
So.
It's just wonderful. So whether it be through the ideas of golf, whether it be through pharmaceutical creation and drugs and vaccines and the work you're doing with AIDS, whether it be within that industry, you have these wonderful, varied worlds that you are disseminating your message of how to feel good and how to heal. And as we wind up, I just want to thank you for the contributions and the difference that you've made, especially to all the people that you don't even know. You know, I have the privilege right now of just thanking you from the bottom of my heart for the difference you've made for me. And most people won't be able to share that directly with you or for whatever reason. So I just want to take them for a moment and give voice to all those people that you've given confidence to know that what they're doing is working and there's a reason for it, that has given them confidence to be able to speak to audiences. And, you know, I can't tell you how many people are probably referencing Candace Pert and the molecules of motion and how the mind-body connection that then creates healing is just so big it's hard to even describe. So on behalf of myself and all of them and Change Your Mind Radio, I just want to say thank you.
So welcome, and I have my hands on my heart, and I'm breathing through my heart, and that's something I would have normally a few years, even a year ago, I would be saying, oh, never mind, I'd be embarrassed by it. And now I'm joining in that gratitude, which is not just a gratitude to me, but to everyone across the world, part of this movement of healing and love, consciousness, and health. And Craig, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this interview, which I feel is good. It's good medicine for me.
You're welcome, and if you'll allow, we'll come back again, and maybe we'll do a specific topic. Maybe we'll just do one on EFT or one on another subject, and do it in video, and have get people to even feel a greater connection with you by listening and seeing you as well. So as we wind down today, I will say thank you, everybody. Please know the next show is actually a special one for 4th of July and Finding Freedom from the Pain of Your Past with Dr. Gabor Mate. We have coming up also later this month Dr. Norm Shealy, Dr. Dean Radin, wonderful people coming up. And if you would like to connect further, you can look on Facebook under the fan page of Transformational Dialogues. You can go to EFT Radio Online and search my name, Dr. Craig Weiner, and find the archives of past shows with everybody from Larry Dossi and Joe Dispenza and Bernie Siegel and so many other brilliant, wonderful other people just like Candace. And I just want to close the show by saying thank you for listening. Please share these times together with your friends, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. On behalf of Change Your Mind Transformational Dialogue Radio, this is Dr. Craig Weiner saying thank you, have a blessed day, and a blessed life.